When Ashley got promoted to regional director at her firm, I couldn't have been prouder. For 7 years, we had built a life together, and if anyone deserved success, it was her. She had worked tirelessly, climbing the corporate ladder with a determination that had always inspired me. "Ryan," she said the day she got the news, her face glowing with excitement, "this changes everything for us. We're going to have the life we always dreamed of." She wasn't wrong. Her new salary dwarfed mine as a small-town contractor, and at first, I didn't mind. We were a team, or so I thought. But as the weeks turned into months, I noticed subtle changes in the way Ashley talked about us. It wasn't "we" anymore. It was her career, her house, her goals. Our shared dreams seemed to fade as she became more engrossed in her world, a world that no longer felt like it had space for me. I tried to brush it off. After all, she was under a lot of stress. With her promotion came longer hours, constant travel, and the pressure to deliver. She assured me that the distance between us, both literal and emotional, was temporary. But intimacy dwindled. Her kisses became obligatory, her touch fleeting, and her excuses predictable. "I'm exhausted," she'd say, brushing past me on her way to bed. I told myself to be patient, to support her through this busy season. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman I fell in love with was slipping away. The turning point came one evening when I suggested we spend a weekend together, just the two of us. "Ashley, let's get away for a bit. You need a break, and we need time together." She didn't even look up from her laptop. "Ryan, I can't afford to take time off right now. You don't understand how high the stakes are for me." Her words stung more than I cared to admit. For her. Everything was for her now. I started to question my place in our marriage. Was I just the man who fixed things around the house and picked up groceries? Did she see me as a partner, or was I a placeholder, someone who couldn't keep up with her ambition? The doubts gnawed at me, but I kept them to myself, trying to push through the growing silence in our relationship. Until one day, everything changed with a phone call I never saw coming. It was late afternoon, and I was in the garage repairing an old chair when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen surprised me, Melanie, Ashley's secretary. "Melanie? Is everything okay?" I asked, wiping my hands on my jeans. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when she finally spoke, her voice was tight, almost trembling. "Ryan, I don't mean to intrude," she began, "but there's something you need to know." The air felt heavy as I gripped the phone tighter. "What is it?" "It's Ashley," Melanie said hesitantly. She's involved with some of her business partners." "I didn't want to get involved, but I thought you deserved to hear it from someone before you find out another way." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. My mind raced to catch up with what she was saying, but all I could manage was, "Are you sure?" "I'm sorry, Ryan," she said softly. "I've seen things. I wish I didn't know, but I do. I thought it was right to tell you." The call ended, leaving me standing in the garage with my phone still pressed to my ear. The chair I had been working on fell to the floor with a clatter, but I barely noticed. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood there, numb, as the illusion I had clung to for months crumbled around me. After Melanie's revelation, I began to see everything clearly, as if a fog had lifted from my mind. The clues had been there all along: Ashley's late-night work trips, the extra effort she suddenly put into her appearance, and the way she'd guard her phone like it was a treasure chest. Whenever I asked her about the long hours or the sudden influx of urgent dinners with colleagues, her responses were sharp and dismissive. "You wouldn't understand, Ryan," she'd say, her tone dripping with condescension. "This is corporate life. It's not like fixing someone's leaky faucet." The words cut deeper than she realized, but I never let it show. I swallowed my insecurities, hoping that if I gave her the space she needed, things would get better. But after that phone call from Melanie, I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion any longer. One night, after Sophie was asleep, I decided to confront her. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom as she sat at her vanity, scrolling through her phone. My heart raced, my hands clammy, but I kept my voice steady. "Ashley," I said, my tone even. "Are you cheating on me?" Her reaction was immediate. She let out a laugh, not the warm, genuine laugh I used to love, but a hollow, mirthless sound. "Of course not, Ryan. Don't be ridiculous." But she didn't meet my eyes. She kept her gaze fixed on the mirror in front of her, her fingers gripping the edge of the vanity just a little too tightly. "Look at me," I said, stepping closer. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the mirror before finally meeting mine. For a split second, I saw something, fear, guilt, maybe both, but she quickly masked it with indignation. "Why would you even ask me that?" she said, her voice rising. "Is this because Melanie called you?" "She's overstepping boundaries, Ryan. She doesn't know what she's talking about." But her voice cracked, just slightly, and in that moment, I knew. She was lying. The next day, I hired a private investigator. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. I hated the idea of spying on the woman I had built my life with, but I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The PI, a no-nonsense man named Greg, assured me he would handle everything discreetly. Within days, he had what he called ironclad proof. We met in his office, where he handed me a manila envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing photographs, text message transcripts, and itineraries. The evidence was damning. Ashley wasn't just cheating. She had entangled herself with two of her business partners, smooth-talking, younger men who exuded confidence. Both were married with children. They weren't just colleagues, they were board members of her company. The photos showed Ashley at a hotel bar with one of them, leaning in close, her hand on his arm. Another captured her leaving a car with the other man, their faces lit by shared laughter. I stared at the images, my chest tightening with a mix of rage and devastation. "This isn't just infidelity," Greg said, his voice low. "She's playing a dangerous game. These men are powerful, and if this gets out, it could ruin them, and her." I barely heard him. My mind was stuck on the betrayal, the lies, and the months I had spent wondering why I wasn't enough. This wasn't a simple mistake or a fleeting lapse in judgment. This was a calculated web of deceit, orchestrated by the woman I thought I knew. Betrayal burns, but rage is cold. And mine. It sharpened into something cold, deliberate, and focused. After the shock subsided, after the heartbreak settled into a dull ache in my chest, a singular thought took root: Ashley and her partners couldn't walk away from this unscathed. Not after what they'd done, to me, to their families, to the trust they had all so casually discarded. For 2 weeks, I worked in silence, turning my pain into precision. The manila envelope from Greg became my blueprint. I combed through every photograph, every text log, every itinerary. I knew their names, their schedules, even the pet names they used in their messages. The longer I studied, the more detached I became. It wasn't about Ashley anymore, it was about justice. The first letters I wrote were to their wives. The words came easily, though I chose them carefully. I wasn't vindictive, but I didn't hold back the truth either. "I'm writing to you anonymously because you deserve to know the truth. Your husband has been engaging in an affair with my wife, Ashley. The relationship began during company business trips and continued in private meetings, as evidenced by the attached documents. I know how devastating this information must be, but I believe you deserve to decide how to proceed armed with the truth." I included copies of the most damning photographs and text messages, proof that couldn't be denied or spun into lies. I sealed each letter in a plain white envelope, unmarked except for the addresses, and sent them through a third-party mailing service to ensure they couldn't be traced back to me. The next letters were more challenging but just as critical. These went to the board members of Ashley's firm, including the chairman. Unlike the personal tone of the letters to the wives, these were factual and professional, outlining the ethical violations and potential scandals brewing under their noses. To whom it may concern, I began each one, it has come to my attention that 2 of your board members have been engaging in unethical behavior that could jeopardize the reputation and stability of your firm. Enclosed, you will find evidence of their inappropriate relationship with a fellow employee, Ashley, which includes misuse of company resources and questionable conduct during business hours. I knew the corporate world would not take such allegations lightly, especially with solid evidence attached. The fallout was swift and brutal, like a storm tearing through everything in its path. It began at a company gala, an event Ashley had been looking forward to for weeks. She'd mentioned it in passing, another essential networking opportunity. But this time, she arrived under entirely different circumstances. One of her lover's wives, a petite but fierce woman named Lauren, confronted him in the middle of the event. Clad in a designer dress that screamed elegance, Lauren held none of that composure in her voice as she stormed up to him, a crumpled letter clutched in her manicured hand. "How long?" she demanded, her voice rising above the hum of polite conversations and clinking champagne glasses. Her husband, smooth, confident, always in control, looked like he'd been slapped. His stammered excuses did nothing to quell Lauren's fury. She held up the letter, shaking it for all to see. "This," she shouted. "This is what you've been doing while I've been at home with the kids." With her. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd, and the room filled with the kind of tension that freezes time. Lauren didn't stop there. "I hope it was worth it," she spat, her voice cutting through the silence. "Because you just destroyed everything." By the time security escorted her out, the damage was done. Ashley's name was on everyone's lips, tied to scandal, infidelity, and disgrace. The rumors spread through Ashley's workplace like wildfire. Whispers in hallways became heated discussions in conference rooms. The board members who had received my letters wasted no time addressing the potential PR catastrophe. An emergency meeting was called, and Ashley was summoned to explain herself. She arrived flustered but poised, dressed in her sharpest suit and clinging to the confidence that had always been her shield. But confidence couldn't save her now. "What's going on?" she asked as she entered the boardroom, her voice steady despite the murmurs surrounding her. The chairman, an older man with a stern demeanor, wasted no time. He slid a copy of the letter across the table. "Care to explain this?" he asked, his voice heavy with disapproval. Ashley picked up the paper, her hands trembling slightly as she read. Her face paled, and for a moment, she was at a loss for words. This is a misunderstanding," she finally said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's been taken out of context." But the board wasn't buying it. "Misunderstanding," one of the members said, his tone incredulous. "These are explicit messages, Ms. Carter. This is far beyond a miscommunication." Ashley tried to fight back, spinning excuses and pointing fingers, but the evidence was too damning. The photographs, the text logs, the itineraries, they painted a picture of someone who had used her position for personal gain at the expense of the company's integrity. The 2 men involved, the same board members she had been so entangled with, were forced to resign almost immediately. Their departures were framed as personal decisions, but everyone knew the truth. Their wives had filed for divorce within days of receiving the letters, and lawsuits were already looming. As for Ashley, the board couldn't fire her outright, not yet. They needed to conduct a formal investigation to avoid any legal backlash. But they stripped her of key responsibilities, placed her on administrative leave, and quietly began searching for her replacement. At home, Ashley's life was unraveling just as quickly. Her phone rang constantly, angry calls from the wives of her former lovers, panicked pleas from the men themselves, and cold inquiries from reporters sniffing out the scandal. She ignored most of them, her once perfect composure slipping more with each passing day. When she wasn't on the phone, she was scouring the internet, trying to contain the spread of rumors. But the damage was done. Her carefully curated professional image, the persona she had worked so hard to build, was shattered. It wasn't long before the first article appeared in a local business blog. The headline was scathing: "Corporate Scandal, Prominent Director Linked to Workplace Affairs." The piece was damning, detailing the accusations against Ashley and her lovers. While it didn't name the wives who had come forward or the anonymous source who had provided the evidence, it didn't need to. Anyone in her industry could connect the dots. Ashley's attempts to deny the claims only made things worse. "It's all been exaggerated," she told a reporter during a desperate phone interview. "People are just looking for a scandal to sensationalize." But the reporter had done their homework. "What about the letters, Ms. Carter? Or the photos? Are you denying their authenticity?" Ashley hung up without answering. Within weeks, her life as she knew it was gone. The investigation at her firm concluded swiftly, and the findings were damning. The board couldn't risk keeping her on after everything that had surfaced. Her termination was framed as a mutual decision, but everyone knew the truth. With her career in ruins, Ashley turned to her social circle for support. But the friends who had once admired her success now avoided her, wary of being caught in the fallout. She was alone, her reputation in shreds, with no one to blame but herself. For the first time in her life, Ashley Carter, always so confident, so untouchable, was facing the consequences of her actions. And this time, there was no way out. After Ashley's life crumbled around her, I made my next move, not out of spite, but necessity. I filed for divorce and full custody of our 3-year-old daughter, Sophie. The woman I once loved had made it clear where her priorities lay, and Sophie deserved better. The divorce proceedings were grueling. Ashley, desperate to cling to some semblance of control, tried to turn the tables by accusing me of emotional abuse. Her claims were as baseless as they were cruel, but they stung nonetheless. "She's making these accusations because she's desperate," my lawyer, Laura, told me during one of our many late-night strategy meetings. "Don't let it rattle you. We have the evidence to dismantle her case." And Laura was right. Thanks to the records from the private investigator, we had a mountain of proof against Ashley. Her infidelity, her misuse of marital funds, her neglect of Sophie, it all painted a picture that couldn't be denied. During the court hearings, Ashley's once formidable composure faltered under questioning. "Mrs. Carter," Laura began during cross-examination, her tone calm but unyielding, "you've claimed that Mr. Carter was emotionally abusive. Can you provide specific examples of this alleged behavior?" Ashley shifted in her seat, her confidence wavering. He was controlling," she said finally. "Always asking where I was, questioning me about my work. It was suffocating." Laura didn't miss a beat. "Would you say it's unreasonable for a husband to question his wife's whereabouts after discovering her involvement with multiple coworkers?" The courtroom fell silent. Ashley's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "And as for your claim of emotional abuse," Laura continued, flipping through a folder, "are you aware that Mr. Carter hired a private investigator who documented your affairs in detail?" Ashley's face turned crimson. "That's irrelevant," she snapped, her voice cracking. "I think the court would disagree," Laura said, her voice steady. "Your actions directly impacted your marriage, your family, and most importantly, your daughter. Would you like me to present the evidence now, or shall we move on?" Ashley sank back into her chair, defeated. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. "Given the evidence presented," he said, his tone firm, "it is clear that Mr. Carter has acted in the best interests of the child, while Mrs. Carter's actions have demonstrated a pattern of poor judgment and neglect. Custody of Sophie Carter will be awarded to Mr. Carter, with visitation rights for Mrs. Carter to be determined at a later date." The words hit me like a wave, not in a bad way, but in a way that finally let me exhale after months of tension. I looked over at Sophie, sitting quietly with my parents in the back of the courtroom. She smiled at me, her little face radiating trust and love. Ashley, on the other hand, looked utterly broken. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she shook her head, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Outside the courtroom, Ashley approached me. "Ryan," she said, her voice trembling, "I know I've made mistakes. But don't take Sophie away from me completely. Please." Her vulnerability surprised me. This wasn't the cold, calculating woman I'd been battling for months. This was someone who had lost everything. I met her gaze, my expression neutral. "Ashley, I'm not taking Sophie away from you. You did that yourself. She deserves stability, and right now, that's something you can't provide." She nodded, unable to argue. In the weeks that followed, the dust began to settle. Ashley lost her job, her reputation, and even her standing with her family. Her parents, once her staunchest supporters, had distanced themselves after learning the truth. Meanwhile, Sophie and I began rebuilding our lives. We moved into a smaller, cozier house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was ours. One night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she wrapped her little arms around my neck. "I love you, Daddy," she said, her voice soft and full of trust. "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. As I closed her bedroom door, a sense of peace washed over me. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest felt lighter. The truth, painful as it had been, had leveled the field. I didn't celebrate Ashley's downfall. I didn't gloat or seek validation from others. Revenge wasn't the goal, justice was. Now, as I sit on the porch of our new home, watching Sophie play in the yard, I find myself wondering, was this revenge or justice? Perhaps it was both. What do you think? Would you have done things differently?